Thank you everyone for coming. This is a really exciting moment for us because we've been working, as Chris said, very hard for a very long time with all of you and partners. Immense amount of thanks needs to go to everybody in Grand Rapids that's participated because it's what's made this process as rich as it's been. So what I'd like to do is just give you the broad overview of what GR Forward is focused on, what the document contains, and just highlight a little bit of the process that we've been through and some of the key findings. As you know, this is a really expansive project. It started off as a downtown plan, emerged to become this river corridor plan because of concerns around the flood infrastructure and some of the other issues associated with the river. And of course, GRPS is involved as well, thinking about some of their schools and programs with respect to some of their specific facilities in and near downtown. So it's really a number of plans that have been moving in the same path for quite some time. And one thing I'd like to say about GR Forward is that when we're undertaking an effort like this, we're building on the success of prior plans. Right? So the Voices and Visions plan from 1993 was the last downtown plan. There's the master plan, of course, done in 2002. There's Green Grand Rapids. All of this work has really laid the foundation for what GR Forward has been able to accomplish, and I think we can accomplish, because Grand Rapids has shown an immense amount of capacity to undertake a lot of work on the ground. The fact that Voices and Visions is effectively implemented means that it is time for a new downtown plan and rethinking how we connect to the river, and that is really an opportunity for us. So building upon that foundation of great planning and great implementation, we've spent the last year and a half doing an immense amount of research, data collecting, but also an immense amount of listening. So all the different ways that we've gone out to try to reach the community and different members of the community. So we've set up open houses, we've gone into community meetings, we've done as much as we can to provide as many opportunities for folks to get involved. And the number, it's approximately about 3,600 people have been involved in this process. So that's also a lot of data for us to understand, collect, and then represent. This is what the community says are their priorities. So just as a couple highlights, we said we'd taken over a downtown storefront downtown. This was our open house that we had open for about a month. And invited the community in to tell us what they thought about downtown and the river today, as well as what they'd like to see tomorrow. We had an immense amount of excellent feedback from this. There have been presentations, lots of presentations. So Chris, thanks to Tim Kelly and Suzanne and others at the city that have been on the ground doing just an immense amount of work to make sure that everyone is up to speed on where we were in each step of the process for GR Forward. And we learned a lot. We asked people what their big ideas were. We asked people to translate those big ideas to specific places, either along the river or downtown. This is where folks identified really specific priorities, whether it's the improvement of a park or opportunity for river access, or a way to redesign a street so that it's safer for pedestrians. All of those ideas, over 900 ideas on this map alone, help to really fuel all of the strategies that are contained within GR Forward. At some point, as we go through the process, just broadly speaking, when we're doing public process like this, we start big picture. So how would you define downtown and the river today? How would you define it tomorrow? We're starting with the vision. And as we go more and more through the process, we get more and more specific. Right? Everything becomes a little bit more in focus. In the last set of public meetings, we had 50 strategies that we shared with the public, and we asked them to prioritize those strategies for us. And this is our top 10 list, which hits a lot of the things that we've talked about with the steering committees, and it really reflects a lot of the public opinion throughout the entire process. Things like more retail downtown, a river trail on both sides of the river, improving regional connections to downtown, and thinking about as well expanded arts and cultural events and temporary programming. So when we asked people to prioritize, this became very quickly a list that encompasses so much of what's in GR Forward, and we're really trying to reflect those priorities because this is what people would like to see for their downtown and the river. I want to mention this as well. This is one of the early things that we did, and it helped to fuel the vision for GR Forward. This is where we asked folks, tell us what you think of downtown and the river today. We always like to see big words like potential. And then what would you like to see tomorrow? And you see one of the biggest words here is diversity. And that encompasses a number of different things. Folks would like to see a diversity of uses downtown and on the river, a diversity of activities, but also a diversity of people. So addressing that issue of diversity, ensuring that downtown is both welcoming and inclusive, is threaded throughout the entire document. So you'll see that with respect to transportation, you'll see that with respect to housing, you'll see that with respect to economic development. So it becomes one of those underlying foundational aspects of GR Forward that's so important to us. So this vision statement, which I won't bother reading, everything in bold were direct quotes from many folks that were involved in the process. We kind of crowdsourced the vision statement. You told us what you'd like to see for tomorrow and going forward with the river and downtown, and we put that together in a vision statement and then started to organize strategies around a series of goals. Goals related to the river, goals related to housing, etc. So I'm going to take you through each of those goal areas very quickly and hit some of the high points. For the first goal with respect to the river, I'm going to have River Scott come over and speak with you. He's been leading the design of the Grand River Corridor, working with us through the public outreach, and helping to define an approach that addresses not just the flood infrastructure, but also access and equity issues for all neighborhoods and all amphibians to reach the river.
Awesome, thank you, Scott. So the city is called Grand Rapids, so there's an obvious relationship that we have with the river. And I think what we want to do in this project is to really restore the river as a draw, create a connected and equitable river corridor. And I think what we have to do is understand that relationship, first of all, because it's very interesting in that the way that the Grand River functions today is very constrained as it relates to how the city's built up that edge. Its past, it functioned like this. It's a glacial trough that we now live within the city. And so we need to have infrastructure in order to control this river. And we can do that in a lot of ways. But we need to understand that there are ways that we can do that that creates an amenity for us to utilize that river. And that's really been part of our approach and understanding that we can create a change, beneficial change, so that we can use this as an amenity. And it's been done, it is used, we want to bolster that. We want to make sure that we can emphasize that. We want to make sure that we can change that interface, not only what happens in the water, but what happens on the edges. And it's very critical that we think of infrastructure as a way that we can do this. And so we're not building flood walls, what we're doing is we're rebuilding an edge. We're creating infrastructure that not only protects, but enhances and amenitizes. It allows for a new ecology to emerge, which then supports improved water quality. This is just an example of certain ways that we can do this, and throughout the plan we've been talking about where this can then happen, but you have situations like terrace flood walls and terrace wetlands integrated within that river edge, which then allows people really access to a unique environment, which is going to then support what Grand Rapids is. So one example of this is what we were proposing, and there's a series of sites, opportunity sites, which we've then talked about what we can do in these parcels. The Public Museum is a great example of this because it includes not only a revamp of the infrastructure, but a new relationship by which people can learn and experience the river, get down to the river, to understand what it's all about. We're also reinforcing really the Whitewater Initiative, so looking at ways that we can create potential open spaces within the river so that the river is really for everybody to experience in a whole variety of ways. The Park Island is one example of this, which allows people to experience the rapids without having to get into a boat. The other thing that we've done with Whitewater is really try to coordinate both what they need to do in terms of access to get the project done, but also how and where people can get in and out of the river along the entire corridor, as well as how we then create access. So we imagine it as kind of a surf and turf, but it's really a whole integrated system of activities and allowing for people to get in and out and then use the river as the park itself. The next really critical piece of what happens along the river is how we can try and connect the city to a regional trail system. When we do this, it means that Grand Rapids becomes the hub in that system. which then it really allows people to travel from North Dakota to the Appalachian Trail via Grand Rapids. And this is part of what becomes a major amenity and a regional draw, and helps support Grand Rapids as a brand. But we have work to do in order to make that happen. We have to make those connections. And as Scott pointed out, this is something that we want to be equitable. So this is going to happen on both sides of the river, on the west side and the east side. So we've looked at basically what we have to do in order to make those connections, and talked about what kind of trail we need to have, which is really a multi-use trail, which is about 15 feet wide. And then we looked at ways to accomplish that goal. So how are we going to do that? There's private parcels, there's also parkland. So we came up with a series of types that allow us to deploy this pathway. And all of those types are based upon potentials for land acquisition, or we can use rights of way on people's properties. And it helps us to potentially create a whole series of change over time, which will then create land use change and higher values. So this is an example of that type of mapping. We've done several options in the plan, depending on each one of the contingencies. If you can get ownership, if you can't, you might have to go out into the river. There are certainly places where we have to go around certain parcels. Or I think people, and that actually has an impact on the cost of the system, but we've outlined that, and we want to point into the direction that's the easiest and the most cost-effective within the plan. So there are areas, for example, where we do have trails, and these are not actually up to snuff, so to speak, in terms of bandwidth. And so we've shown examples of how you can expand that to allow for the type of access that we're talking about, which then amenitizes that portion of the trail. There are other sites, like the Cold Brook site, where this is actually happening. This is a demonstration project. And so in this particular aspect, there's no trail. And so what we're trying to do with that project is to show people what that trail system looks like, what are the materials, how do we actually insert this idea of ecology and river function into a very, very tight space. This is an example of that particular effort, and that will be coming soon to reality. Hopefully within the next few months, construction will start. So this whole system then really starts to bolster not only what happens in the river, but what happens in the city, right? This becomes the new brand for the city, and I think rightfully supports the idea that this is Grand Rapids. And so one of the critical pieces of it is not just to build the big north-south corridor, but to make sure that people have access to that new park system once it's developed. So we talked about creating these east-west connections. You can kind of see them at the scale of the city here. And in diagram form, you can see it's distributed really from the north of the city all the way to the south, so that people within the near neighborhoods can get to that open space and make those connections. It's not only about just people, but it's also how we then experience connectivity to the river and allow people from all over the city. It's not just about the downtown and people that are at the very edge of the system. And within each one of these things, we've created a series of brands so that each one of the cross streets has its own identity as it relates not only to the neighborhoods, but also the river. So one example of this is Bridge Street, where we talk about healthy people and healthy businesses along that connection. And so you can see the before and after here. We really start to take that street, redesign it in a way where you have businesses, farmers markets, et cetera, along that street, as well as the existing businesses that are there, and integrate things like green infrastructure that relate to river health and people's health as it relates to their own mobility. Within each one of these, we have to cross certain barriers to the river, and we want to make sure that those things are changed from barriers really to gateways. And we can do this by really adding some of these amenities and also green infrastructure elements so that they become really these thresholds where people are like, well, that's the neighborhood that I'm going to, or that's the river that I'm going to. Again, this is the example at Bridge Street. So really, there are a series of opportunity sites. There are 15 main opportunity sites, 28 sites that we've identified in the plan altogether. they become this new park system. We want to make sure that it's not just one, assumed to be one park, but it's really a series of parks that make up the system, and each one of them have their own brand and their own identity. And this really helps us create this new idea that Grand Rapids becomes this adventure city. So it's about people experiencing the great outdoors in an urban environment, which is a very unique idea that we're presenting in the plan. As the real showcase of that idea is the Adventure Park, which will have a series of elements like a ropes course, climbing wall, and skate park integrated. In that will be the fish ladder, which will be an access point for all of the water activities that will occur. So we actually have so with each one of the sites, we present what's happening on land in terms of activity, as well as what's happening in the water, so that you can understand that relationship that exists. As we look at downtown, we have this kind of framing that's occurring at the Grand View Park, which is Fish Ladder Park, expansion or renovation of that park, as well as these opportunities for development sites like the MSU's City and Kent County site. So we have a series of within each one of these sites, you have renovated parks, you have development opportunities, both which are public development opportunities and possibly private public partnership opportunities. So MSU is an example really of a site where we could imagine it as a completely developed as a park or potentially as a development site. Sorry, let me point this out. Each one of the sites, we also show how the flood control measure works. We look at the concept for each one of these sites and access as it relates to the trail. And then we talk about how that environment can be enhanced through various elements of the park, as well as how the access can occur. In this particular site, you can see that there's a fishing wall as well as access down to the river. And then we look at a potential option for development on this parcel, where you're actually maybe limiting the amount of park, but this could potentially help fund some of the park activities. So we have an example of this where it's really, it gives you options for the future. But it also shows how within each one of them you still have a situation where you are getting down to the river and making sure that people can enjoy that amenity. We're not only doing this with large development sites, but we're also looking at smaller parcels within the city because we know we have a tight urban environment. And so we want to make sure that we're showing that you can still create access in these locations, as well as really interesting urban amenities. Scott.
Thank you. So Scott's talking about how important the river is as an amenity, as a draw for visitors, but also as a driver for growth. And that's where we start to talk about some of the other aspects of this plan. If we invest in the river, what kind of potential impacts can that have? Positive impacts can that have on Grand Rapids? And the largest piece of the plan is really considering downtown as a true neighborhood. A neighborhood that's home to a diverse population. And so what this is responding to are opportunities not just to reinforce investment in the river by having more housing and more retail and more services downtown. It's also responding to what a lot of downtown residents have told us, which is that they would like more services. So for those of you that have been following this process, you've heard the term critical mass. That's what's been driving a lot of this thinking. We're critical mass downtown. If you look at other downtowns, once you reach about 10,000 households, you start to see things that are open on a Saturday morning, neighborhood services, the kinds of things that folks said they would like. Today we have about 5,000 people downtown. They're concentrated in a few locations. This map's a little bit old, but nevertheless, part of the idea here is to fill in some of those gaps and to create a real neighborhood downtown. We had an economist on our team who looked at the potential for housing She's the same economist that did work in Grand Rapids 5 years ago. She's now doing work for the entire city with Lori Volk. So she knows the housing market very well, and she said, well, look, you could, in the next 5 years, you could add about 2,000 housing units, but they need to be different types of units. So some are lofts, some should be townhomes, some should be smaller units for a whole range of reasons, because there's lots of different people that would like to live downtown, and they have different needs. So what we do when we go through this process is we look at downtown and then we start to realize, well, actually downtown isn't really one district, it's a lot of smaller districts. Some of these districts are really well suited for new housing and new development in line with this idea of creating a neighborhood, and others aren't as much because they're primarily focused on institutional uses or other types of things. So we use that as kind of a driver to help us then look at the opportunities for downtown development. So this is downtown today. This is what's already in the books. It shows that you have real momentum happening in Grand Rapids. Lots of proposals that are in the pipeline and design. There's certainly real interest in investing downtown because you've already built so much value, right? The previous work that you've done, you've built value downtown, and folks want to capitalize on that. So to help reach this critical mass goal, there's a couple things that are involved with this, and one of the main things is to start looking at the code. What do we allow as a city in terms of development? The bonuses, the heights, all of those things. And should we change what's in the code to help achieve that critical mass goal over time? So we looked at a number of different things. We looked at heights and we looked at the bonuses specifically. I'm going to skip this for a second. I'm going to move to heights because I'm going to walk you through all of it anyway. In terms of heights, right now we have a couple overlays downtown. There's this height overlay B that says you can go as tall as 1. And then there's a height overlay A, this is the light blue, that says you can go a certain height, and if you do certain things, you can go even taller. So one of the things that we've recommended is expanding some of this height overlay to incorporate areas around 131, closer to the river on the west side, but also instituting a couple interim height overlays. And the reason for this is that if you look at a site, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, like 201 Market, big publicly owned site on the river, we look at the opportunities for that site, we think, well, we might actually want to go a little taller than what A allows to help offset the cost of improvements and provide a lot more people to activate the space and provide those connections to the river. But at the same time, we don't want to make it a height overlay B where we can't negotiate with developers to get some of the things that we'd like public access to the river and those types of things. So we looked at height strategically, and then we started to look at the bonuses. And there are a number of changes that we're recommending as a part of the bonuses and some of how we're regulating development downtown. One of them has to do with open space. We'd like to make more use of the payment in lieu to sort of a downtown open space fund, as opposed to saying you would get a bonus for your development if you create a small open space on your site. The thinking here is that I'd rather have a couple parks that are really, really nice and well-funded and well-maintained, rather than a lot of little parks that are created in the context of specific developments that don't add up to that much over time. We're also looking at parking, and this is one of the places where we're really looking to offer choice. So right now we have parking minimums downtown. This can be a real challenge for developers to meet some of those parking requirements depending on the site. What we'd like to do is change the minimums to maximums. So we offer the developers the choice to say, if we need a certain amount of spaces for our development, that's what we'll provide. But if we don't feel like we need as many spaces, it is up to the developers to decide how much they would like to invest and how they will handle their own parking needs based upon what they're building. And this is something that you see in other cities as well, in terms of removing some of those barriers to development downtown. We'll be looking at the Grand River overlay. There is a Grand River overlay. It says if you're going to build on the river, you should do certain things to make sure we have access to the river. We're going to make some recommendations to change that and allow a little bit more density in exchange for some of that public access. And then there's a few things around ground floor retail. Developers in the room will know this. If you put retail on the ground floor of your building anywhere downtown, you get a bonus. We actually think that might not be the best idea. Instead, it might be good to actually regulate where we're incentivizing retail. The reason is we only have so much retail, so many stores that we can support downtown. We would rather have them concentrated on a series of corridors where there's already a lot of retail and stores and activity, as opposed to scattered throughout downtown. So it doesn't mean you can't put retail on the bottom of your building if you're not on one of these blue streets. It just means that maybe we shouldn't incentivize it. So we're really trying to encourage the type of uses on the corridors that we'd like to see. And we also think there's some corridors like Bridge, parts of Ionian and Commerce, Pearl, that should operate a lot like Monroe Center does today, which is to require retail, certain types of activities, because this is where you would want to fill in all of the vacant storefronts and make sure that you really have a real presence on the street. So then we can look at some development opportunities. This is just a potential build out of downtown over time, so much longer than 5 years. But we wanted to look at some different opportunities. So if we make some of these changes in the code and we look at how the land is currently used and where the opportunities are for development, what are some of the things we could do? Well, one of the main things is to make sure that we're looking at the Market Monroe corridor as this key interface between the city and the river. Scott already talked to you about the MSU and city and Kent County site. I'll talk to you about 201 very briefly. 201 Market is currently a lot of city facilities. There are some constraints on it, sewer lines, want to make sure there's views to the river. So we go through this process to understand what the constraints are. And then we start to look at the opportunities. And the opportunities here are twofold. We have flood infrastructure that we can build into the site to become a real amenity. But then we also have this opportunity to create what we've been calling a green living room, a very large open space that there's just not the space to create anywhere else on the river. So this becomes a unique space and a draw for this entire portion of the river, but also an amenity that adds real value to potential development around it. So this is just some examples. Green living room in terms of scale, Bryant Park, Millennium Park. There are other examples where this type of open space provides an opportunity to program for large events, but also to be really attractive on a day-to-day basis. So we put together a site plan that just shows the potential type of development. It includes not just what the development is, but also how you would service it, parking, those types of things. So we're doing some tests of development opportunities downtown in hopes to understand how this can grow over time and how it also connects into the river. Scott showed you these before. It's not just about what happens in the land, but also in the water. And then I mentioned Market Monroe specifically. This is Market just south of Fulton. We want to make sure that new development is actively engaging the street and that we're thinking about the design of Market in particular so that we can encourage folks to walk, bike, drive south of Fulton and really engage with the river as this development progresses. So it's just a couple examples. We've been looking at this in context. Scott showed you a few other images that show the trail kind of coming in and out of these sites. But it's a way for us to help visualize and understand what the potential benefits are in pursuing development in different locations in downtown. One of the other places we looked at is the west side. We've heard lots of comments about we need to integrate the west side into the strategy, not just from the perspective of adding a trail to the west side of the river, but also thinking of how the west side connects to the river. And so we've looked at a couple different opportunities. Certainly there's a lot of momentum and things starting to happen on Bridge Street. Seems to be a lot of agreement that Bridge Street should continue to be a commercial corridor, a neighborhood-serving commercial corridor. Right now we have lots of parking lots on the near west side, east of the rail. So what we're showing is a potential approach that says, on Seward, we're looking at neighborhood-scaled development, things like the townhouses and some of the projects that have already been built recently that are more in line with the scale of the surrounding neighborhood to help transition towards the river. And then looking at opportunities on some of these parking lots closer to 131 to really build almost an entirely new set of uses surrounding an open space that would help to create, again, the amenity for all of these uses to surround. And we've also been thinking a good bit about Hartside District, Arena South, and in particular, Division. So there's been lots of comments, ideas, what can we do with Division going forward? We think Division needs a multi-pronged strategy. Right now, it's required that you have retail on Division. That's one of the things we think actually shouldn't be a requirement, but we can incentivize it. Because the idea is that Division really has the opportunity to be a small business corridor. There's already arts organizations in some of those uses. There are opportunities to fill some of those storefronts with new businesses and startups in a location that's really close to the heart of downtown. But then also think about the design of the street itself, recognizing that it is a state-controlled street that will require a fair amount of coordination and discussion. But we want GR Forward to at least recognize that as an opportunity to start those discussions. And then there's also a question about affordability. And this is a direct quote, affordability of homes. in downtown. So what happens now, as people have often described it to us, is that there's a lot of units downtown that are income restricted. Actually, this should say percent income restricted. I.e. you have to have a certain income to be able to stay in those units. And then there's new development that's at a fairly high price point. So what happens to those that are looking for something that's a little bit more moderately priced, that doesn't meet those income requirements, i.e. the missing middle? So we're thinking about how we really create a balanced set of housing options downtown in a couple of different ways. And we think there's a number of different strategies here. One is that we have income restricted housing downtown. That percentage will decrease over time as there's more market rate development downtown. And some of those income restricted units, some, not all, will transition to market over time. So we can look at developing some additional income restricted housing as development progresses downtown as a way of protecting some of that resource. The other way is to provide some incentives for what we're calling workforce housing, that 60 to 120% of median income, you're a teacher, you work at the fire department, you're a recent professional who just graduated school, your income level hits that range, that missing middle. So if developers provide a certain percentage within the context of their development, for folks at that income level, they could get some additional height bonuses. And then we're also looking at encouraging smaller units. Some people that graduate smaller unit wouldn't be for me. I have 2 kids, they take up a lot of space. But for others, smaller units are perfect. That's exactly what they want as the first housing option downtown, and so we should afford that opportunity downtown as well. Now, of course, this relates into how we move around downtown. If we have all of this development, what does that mean in terms of how people get in and out of downtown? And we have this divided downtown, not just by the highways and the river, but some of these major streets that really separate different parts of downtown from one another. In the public process, and this is one of the results of the open house graphics, we asked people what their transportation priorities are, and overwhelmingly we had improved sidewalks, separated bike lanes, and more trees. Things that would help to expand the walkability of downtown, make it more friendly to walk downtown, but also, if I choose to ride a bike, I would like to do so and feel that I'm safe doing so. So it's part of what this chapter has really been focused on, the mobility chapter, is about providing choice. There are folks who will want to and continue to drive, they should be able to do so. There are folks who may want to bike or walk, they should also feel that it's affordable, safe, and convenient for them to do so, as well as take transit. So the chapter is focused on prioritizing some pedestrian safety measures. There are a number of places downtown that need a little bit of work on making sure that it's safe for pedestrians. And that includes places like Fulton. We've looked at Fulton Street as a potential pilot project to look at pedestrian safety. This is what it looks like today. And what we're suggesting are some measures to help those crossings at intersections, but also to add street parking on Fulton as well as bicycle lanes. The upside of this short-term approach is that if you have a really large event at the arena, where it's art prize or what have you, you can simply use these lanes as an additional travel lane if you need it for traffic. But in the interim, you get a completely different street and a completely different gateway to downtown. We're certainly thinking about parking, right? A lot of the opportunities downtown for development are on parking lots. This is the nature of when you build value downtown and people want to be here, developers want to develop and support that market. That means we have to think very carefully about parking. How do we get people in and out of downtown, and what do we do? We've been talking about establishing what's called Global GR, which is really an evolution of the parking services mission into something that's looking more broadly at mobility issues. So not just parking, but also walking, biking, transit. So looking at all of those aspects as one system. And that means there's a lot of recommendations in GR Forward with respect to parking. So some of that's been about adjusting pricing, right? So we have a lot of people parking in some places and not so much in others. You change a little bit of the pricing, those dynamics also change. So I look to reduce pricing at some ramps, increase some on-street parking as a way of better managing the parking that we have. But also looking at reconfiguring the dash service. We have 4 different dash lines. The idea is to really consolidate that into 2 dash lines that really help to become a downtown circulator, which provides an additional transportation option downtown. Things like new and enhanced mobility options, like incentivizing transit, there are some ideas in GR Florida around how to do that in a way that you work with local employers to set up some of those incentives, or even a parking cash out option. So working with employers to say, instead of providing a parking space, you provide your employees with money and let them choose on how they get to and from work. And then we're also looking at things like bike sharing, car sharing. So it's really, again, about choice downtown and thinking about how all of those things find their way into local streets. So there's a vital streets plan coming up for the city. We've identified some different street typologies because each street has its own opportunities. So in this case, some of these orange streets, these are your gateway streets. They're wider streets, they're handling more traffic. The design approach for those needs to be fundamentally different than a street like Monroe Center or Ionia has different kinds of opportunities. And it's helped to guide some of the specific ideas in GR Forward, including when we're looking at bicycle lanes or opportunity for bicycle lanes, again, to provide that option for those that would like to bike. One of the key opportunities we've looked at is Ionia downtown. Ionia is currently one-way north, very large street, one-way north. It acts as a highway on-ramp in many respects. The idea is to actually integrate a two-way bicycle facility on Ionia, which is a fairly low-cost approach to integrating this kind of a transportation choice in downtown. And what we realized in doing this was that actually north of 196, there's an even bigger opportunity for Ionia, because Ionia is not even a connected through street north of 196. It's really more of a glorified parking lot that eventually connects up to Division, which is really the main north-south street north of 196. So we looked at this as not just an opportunity to extend that bicycle infrastructure, but to really treat this as a linear park system, something that's an amenity for Monroe North, Belknap, and neighborhoods nearby. Of course, we have to look at things like overpasses, how we deal with truck traffic, how we make some of those connections, recognizing the constraints that we currently have with respect to the existing highways and managing some of the traffic downtown, but also using technology to help us understand where those parking assets are, but also transit assets and all of the things that help us move around downtown and towards the river. So there's a lot of strategies embedded in that about technology. For economic development, there's been, I'd say most of this plan entirely is focused on supporting economic development goals. Right? So making it easier and more efficient and safe to get around downtown, building more housing, amenitizing the river. That's all about helping to attract talent, helping to attract businesses and to keep them here. So we have this dynamic now in downtown where if you look at investments since 1980, that chart is pretty self-explanatory. I don't have to go into detail. Right? This is the value we've been talking about. The flip side of that challenge, though, is that as you have new startup businesses who need certain kinds of space, whether it's office type space or say a flex space with like a fabrication room, those startup businesses, whether they're coming out of Start Garden, Jerkin, or others, they need inexpensive, flexible space that's close within or close to downtown in order to help them grow. And as they get bigger, they need more space. So we don't want to lose the businesses that are started in Grand Rapids because they can't find inexpensive real estate and space to do the jobs that they're set up to do. So we're looking specifically at opportunities of protecting some space for work, whether it's artisanal manufacturing, small-scale production, or even coding, IT, software, and medical. They all need space that helps them grow. So these circles identify some areas where there's older industrial buildings that could be repurposed for some of these new economy jobs if we're proactive and get out in front of it. We've created this kind of typology of different types of spaces. So depending upon the type of business that you're looking at, in this case this is preclinical R&D, research and development, there's a whole number of things. We've been trying to align the potential job opportunities with the real estate needs. And then we can look at downtown and river and say, well, are we meeting the real estate needs? Not quite. So there's a little work that we can do to begin to protect some of this space. And that relates to attracting talent and retaining talent. The shorthand to this graph is that those red numbers are bad. So with respect to the employment compared to US, for some key factors, or some key industries here in Grand Rapids, we're behind US norms. Right, which is why some of the major businesses will say, our major challenge is getting people to fill the jobs that we have, whether they're in downtown or in the region. So attracting talent is something that we have to do to fill the jobs we currently have, let alone the jobs that we hope to create going forward. becomes part of that strategy. A big part of attracting talent is the quality and experience of the place. Is downtown unique and exciting? Is the river an amenity that you just can't find anywhere else? That actually does matter, because for all of these different industries, one of their top issues is lifestyle living choice. You see it across the board. So how we invest in the public realm, how we make it easy for folks to get around, the housing choices they have, all of that matters. But we also have to look at building a local talent pool, or as we sometimes call a pipeline of local talent that can fill jobs. So yes, we have to attract folks into Grand Rapids for jobs, but we also need to build a talent pool here in Grand Rapids, and that relates to partnerships with universities, co-op programs, evaluating the local programs that we have that are training youth and others for the specific kinds of jobs that we have. Certainly the Mayor's 100 initiative is a big piece of this. So there are a number of things within GR Forward that is focused on the workforce piece. How do we make the most of the talent we have in the city right now? And I mentioned that experience. What's the experience in downtown in particular? How does that support economic development? Most of you have probably seen this image before, but we look at what is an inactive street, blank walls, parking lots, things that make it feel a little less inviting to walk, or even to bike or move between different parts of downtown. So we have a significant amount of downtown that has this kind of legacy of dead space. So what we're trying to do is find more opportunities for things like this. When you ask people what they like about downtown, this will frequently come up, right? That's one of those main amenities and draws. This is why they like coming downtown, because there's stuff to do. So we put together this graph of all of the downtown events that currently happen in a calendar year. We actually map them out by month, so that we could get a sense of when these things occur and the type of events they are. So we are looking at promoting some more events. For the winter months in particular, we think there's a real opportunity to embrace the winter in Grand Rapids, and there are some great examples. Those are roaring nuts. There are some great examples that other cold weather cities have explored, including, and we've asked this question in the report, we do parklets downtown right now. There's a parklet out at the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. Parklets. What does a winter parklet look like? How does that become a real amenity for folks in the winter? Because believe it or not, there are cities a lot colder than Grand Rapids where people are maximizing the use of public space in the winter. Not everyone, but those that really want to do those things. Then we also look at making sure we're making the most of the downtown parks we have. And this was a consistent comment throughout the public process that Calder Plaza needs, well, insert many different words, but it certainly needs a redesign. And that's something that comes up frequently. And I think there's been a lot of good thinking about this for years. That the issue with Calder Plaza is not just that it's a big blank slate, it's really not connected to very much. So the opportunity is to think of this as connected up to the Medical Mile and Crescent Park, and become kind of a hub in the system that connects the Medical Mile to the river. We define it as. So that trail helps to activate part of the park and connect it to things that are within a block of it. But you wouldn't know if you're standing in Calder Plaza. So this is Calder Plaza today, and the opportunity is to think of that trail system looking through the park, redesigning a portion of that parking garage, which is right across from the entrance to the convention center. So there's a direct connection between this open space and the convention center, as well as thinking of mobile landscapes and some other amenities in the plaza itself that you can use on a day-to-day basis. But when you have a big event, you can move those things out of the way and still have your big events. Because it does serve a really good purpose for bringing folks together on those bigger events. We also looked at Hartside Park. A lot of great conversation around Hartside Park with respect to how is it used today and how could it be used tomorrow. And a lot of great work that went into just create the park in the first place. What we've talked with folks about are the opportunities of saying, can we add more programming? Can we make this more of a destination, both in the summer and the winter? So we've suggested some landscape improvements, maybe a berm on the backside of the park to buffer it from 131, creating a hill closer to Wealthy. And it has a summer version, which includes rain gardens and exhibit gardens, but it also has a winter version. And these kinds of programs, coupled with programming to get youth involved, programming that reaches into neighborhoods will help to connect folks to these types of winter activities. I think it becomes potentially a real destination for families of all backgrounds. And it has to be done not just in terms of the physical improvements, but in how it's programmed. what are the connections between communities. Yeah, the big hill is really intended for sledding in the winter. But where else can you have a winter park like this, where you can enjoy some of these activities and then walk a half a block to go out to eat? Right? This is a unique experience that we're trying to provide. And of course, opportunities for new parks, parklets already happening downtown, and there's more in design. We've looked at Sheldon Avenue as a potential linear park because it already has a number of small parks along it, and it's a double wide street that doesn't need to be that wide. We've also looked at opportunities for what we call Switchback Park. So this is on the Belknap Hill, and the idea is to create a park that's a series of landscapes and ramps that go down the hill, which might provide some opportunities to also get some money to fix the existing stairs. So it's a new way of connecting that community down to Monroe North, but it's also a way of providing a really unique park experience. We also look at things like gateways and streetscape designs. There's a lot of information in GR Forward about the specific streets and gateways and the opportunities, specifically even related to public art. So we're trying to document all of those opportunities, and of course underlying all of this from a public realm standpoint are the basics, right? Our managing trash, capitalizing on the ambassador program, which has been so successful, looking at things like how we deal with snow removal in the winter, but also lighting. There's certainly lots of perception issues about downtown with respect to is it safe. For those that are less familiar with downtown, lighting can play one of many roles to help address some of those issues. And then finally, the last goal is really about schools, and it's with John in the room, so he's not here to correct me if I get something wrong. But the schools, the GRPS has been so fundamental to this process. It's been great to have them on board because there are really two major components to this. There's a whole series of partnerships that GRPS is working on with all of these local institutions downtown, as well as businesses. They're looking to create those partnerships focused on workforce and skill building and making sure that the youth of Grand Rapids are ready for this 21st century economy. So there's partnerships that are valuable, which ties into the economic development and access to jobs downtown. But there's also some physical opportunities, and what GR Forward has been focused on is the Innovation Central, as well as the Museum School. Both of these are projects that are moving forward through GRPS. They're not just facilities that are being redesigned and repurposed, but they're also specialized programs that really provide an amenity and a potential attraction for new families and kids. So at the end of each goal in GR Forward, we have what we've been calling the implementation matrix. I really need a better name for this. The implementation matrix, this is our main task over the next month or two. So what we identify is each recommendation, some initial action steps, what the time frame is. Right now we're just saying, is it a first year, is it within 5 years, or is it within 10 years that we're trying to accomplish these? We've identified generally the responsibility of the partners, who would be involved with each recommendation. So that is a question we get consistently. Who owns GR Forward when it's done? The answer is it's multiple entities. Right? There are some things that DGRI is ideally suited to move forward with. There are some things that are really the responsibility and purview of the city to do, particularly the code changes, as well as a whole host of other things that are contained within this report. So our job over the summer is to align these partners to say, yes, we've been a part of this process and we agree specifically with this recommendation. We will work with you to make this happen. So this will get more and more detail as we go through the summer and also as we start to get public comment. So this is just an example for Goal 2. This is an example for Goal 5. Oh, I forgot to note, if you see source of funds and there's a little line here, that means it doesn't really cost anything to do that recommendation. It's really just repurposing staff on a specific issue within GR Forward. It's something that's already within the purview of what staff is working on, one organization or another. So we have also thinking about the relative cost of some of these different recommendations. We do have a whole list of first-year priorities. We've gone through the entire matrix and said, well, what can we do in the first year? A lot of them are related to things like code changes. Some of them are related to working with businesses around some pedestrian issues and transportation mobility issues. And there are things that are already happening, and that's what's really been wonderful about this process. Implementation has not waited for the plan to be stamped final. The city is already pursuing resiliency grants through HUD for the river corridor. So in line with the work that Scott's doing, we're already pursuing funding sources DGRI has allocated 56, right? I got it.
76 projects.
56 good projects. They were consistent with what was coming out of GR Forward, that we're clearly moving through the process. So there's a different level of implementation that's already happening. GRPS is moving forward with Museum School and Innovation Central. So there's so many things that are already happening, and that's what the implementation is trying to capture. Where can GR Forward add a little momentum to what's already happening, and then what are the new implementation steps that we need to identify to take this to the next level? So next steps for us, I mentioned fine-tuning the implementation approach. We'll be presenting to the Planning Commission. They've already been updated throughout the process, but we'll be presenting to them at the end of July. City Commission likely early August. Is that confirmed?
We'll get on August 11th.
August 11th. If they accept that the plan should be out for public review, we go through a 42-day public review period where this draft and the executive summary and all of its many pages of graphics are out there for public comment. And then afterwards, we finalize the plan. We do want to have one more public event, likely in the lobby of DGRI, which is more of an open house style event where we can summarize the plan and invite people to come in and provide us their thoughts and input. So as much as this has been a community-driven process, we want to make sure it's community-driven even through the review of the document, and that we're making sure that we're getting this right. All the voices are at the table, and that they're in agreement with the approach that they helped create. This has been truly a wonderful process.